Welcome to a special edition of the Jake Feinberg Show. And we are currently living through a vapid time in our country's musical landscape, one filled with inanimate objects serving as humans, an incessant need for perfection, and a general lack of understanding of what has come before. My job as a journalist is not to critique or provide reasons why this has taken place, although the reasons are many, but rather hearken back to a period in our country's musical evolution when the cross-fertilization of idioms was flourishing. It flourished because of artists who lived the music: Joe Williams, King Curtis, Woody Herman, and Harold Land, and others who sought to create and take their show on the road in metropolitan cities. They saw it as their responsibility to play the music for the people and serve as role models for a cadre of musicians who were coming into their own, searching for their own individuality and love, ideas, and stick-to-itiveness to the sessions they took part in. These accompanists knew their job was to make the leader sound as good as possible, be it a Hollywood soundtrack, Motown, or a record session. These accompanists wanted to keep the calendar filled and brought their spiritual energy to the session, which in many ways made the album. My guest today is one of the most prominent and freewheeling studio musicians in the Western world. It could have been working with Bernard Purdie, Cornell Dupree, and Richard T. It could have been with Paul Humphrey, George Bohannon, and Charles Kennard in soul jazz settings. It could have been with Spider Webb and Hampton Hawes playing funk under jazz, or playing jazz over rock with Steely Dan, and on and on and on and on. My guest's resume reads like something out of a fairy tale. Aretha Franklin, Donald Byrd, The Crusaders, Gary Burton, Bobby Humphrey, Joe Cocker, Gary McFarlane, Tim Buckley, Phil Upchurch, Mose Allison, Quincy Jones, and Etta James. No need to say any more. Chuck Rainey, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Well, Jake, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I wanted to ask you, we talked a little bit, previously about how your experience early on playing live night after night in sweaty bars and ballrooms, college gyms, how did that help you in your evolution as a musician?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, number one, it gave me experience with the instrument. The electric bass was primarily a new instrument when I first started playing. I wasn't the first to play it, but then I was among the first to play it in the very early 60s. So playing all those bars and clubs and road gigs with different artists, mainly I would say gave me experience with the instrument. Also to experience in just playing different styles and different kinds of music. You have to practice. Sometimes you can't just practice at home. You got to go out on the road and get experience. You also, too, you have to learn how to get along in situations that are not favorable to you, or work in situations where you weren't the first person to call, or I wasn't the first person to be called. And sometimes it's very difficult to work with people that you don't care for, or work in situations where you don't really like the situations. Poor situations, poor roaming, poor travel, poor food, poor dressing rooms, if there was one at that time. So in loving the music, I guess I got through all that just wanting to play. But I think that helped me just have experience with my instrument, and also working with people in different genres.
We live in a society now, especially amongst musicians, they might come up to you at seminars or something like that and say, I want to play this how do I play this Chuck Rainey bass line? How do I get a bass line like Chuck Rainey? And it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time. And like you said, you can't just practice in your room. And I think that one of the conundrums today, whether it's the cost of travel, lack of venues, et cetera, just the opportunity of getting up there and playing and seeing people fall apart, get themselves back up, or seeing even an opportunity as part of the rhythm section to say, okay, there's kind of a lull here. I need to kind of do something to keep things rolling. I mean, talk about, that's really kind of what I wanted to get at, was that idea of thinking on your feet, and what you could say to younger musicians today who may not have the opportunities to go on the road like you did.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, Jake, is that I'm playing music, especially as a bass player, or being in the rhythm section. Period, whether it's guitar, drums, or piano. When things get to be, as you spoke, in a lull, or you figure you got to do something, I never really thought that way, other than to keep a consistent pattern going. Now, back in the day when I was really playing top 40 music in order to make a living, and playing on the road with artists that had records, there was always a bass line or bass thought to begin with. And as long as I kept up my part, like a drummer doesn't have time to think, he just has to play whatever the groove of the song is. The leader of the band is usually responsible for those lulls that you're talking about, when things seem to be at a down and nothing's really happening. Leaders have to choose musicians that think on their feet. As a bass player, I can't really do anything other than play a bass pattern, a bass line. So I can't do anything, and also to listen to the other musicians. So I never really worried about that. People that want to play like me or play the way that I played, I run across a lot of musicians that that do emulate what I do. And when they get into a situation, they think of me and they try and emulate what I did. But they didn't understand that I was playing with certain musicians. My ideas come from listening from the guitar player to the piano player and to the drummer for feel or for rhythm, and maybe to the guitar player or piano player who makes a certain indication in the music, just in passing by, that gives me an idea to play something with a little bit more melodious. But I never really worried about that, other than I've always been, well, not always, because sometimes I have worked in rhythm sections that weren't thinking on their feet, or they were thinking other than what the whole group needs to be thinking about. Sometimes alcohol and drugs do get in the way. For a bass player, it's very important, I thought, for myself, just to be very consistent in what I was doing, and let the leader or other instruments build off of what I was doing. A lot of people want to have their own independent voice in the music. They want to be, they're watching TV, they listen to the press, they read the articles that people write in a magazine about themselves, and they get enamored with ways that they want to be like that. But my age group, from where we came up, we never thought about our individual
legacy. Yeah, absolutely.
Individuals. We thought about each other. It was always a team effort. Because if the guitar player doesn't like me, I'm not going to get the next gig if he is in power, or if the leader asks him who he likes on bass, I want him to like me, so I don't run over anybody. Now, of course, I haven't always been perfect. I had to learn all these things that I'm talking now about. I had to learn it the hard way, and learning it, being in situations where things just don't work. If I start trying to lay down a signature line or try and be, lay down something individual that points to me, I've never really thought that way. I've just played the way that I play, which is rhythmic, more rhythmic than melodious, although a listener can say, well, that's very melodic. But to me, I'm always thinking of rhythm. Like, I think the bass, for me, is like another drum. It has a drum that is able to voice some kind of melody while I'm playing a rhythm. But that's why we talked earlier about being on the road and playing in a lot of bands, doing a lot of sessions, or not even sessions before I start playing sessions, but just playing a lot of gigs and listening to top 40 music. The bass's role, the role of the bass is, to support the overall, the overall music scene at that particular time. That's what the role of the bass is. It's not solo, it's not to do anything, but just to keep a consistent rhythmic bass line. Back in the day, you could recognize a song by the bass line. Nowadays, it's almost impossible. Not to say that that's bad at music does change. But it's very, very difficult. I have listened to a lot of bass players. As a matter of fact, I still do. I listen to the bass line to all the songs that I do listen to, and I also to know the sound and quality of a lot of individual bass players. Now, of course, when I sit down to play something and nothing is written, because I've listened to a lot of the bass players, I do have an idea of what the bass can do because I have listened and still do listen to a lot of music. I think maybe, too, that's why I was hired so many times in the past, and I always had an idea of what to play because I've listened to a lot of music and I played other instruments before I played the bass. So I do have an idea of what to do that's going to be consistent and to be very, very, just basically to be very consistent in what I'm playing and to make sure that I don't play outside of my strengths. A lot of people try and play things that they really can't play.
Right. No. I mean, when I first started this homage to your generation, I looked up your website and the motto at the top said "Know your strengths," and I was like, that is the greatest line because it's not even. You could take that across all spectrums. I mean, I think that part of the issue with, like you said, music changes, right? But the people who are playing the music also change, and the values of those people change. And when I talk to Joe Sample, Phil Upchurch, Oscar Brashear, Chuck Rainey, Arthur Adams, they reiterated the exact same thing that you talked about, which was just being a team. You listen to the Charles Kennard records that you were on, and we'll listen to them. Charles Kennard would play a 10-minute jam with you, and he might play only 2 minutes of a solo, even though it's his record. He's allowing the accompanists, Bohannon, Adams, Rush, to get out and play their... And even Rainey would get in for a bass solo once in a while. He would be the last one to solo. You want to talk about taking the ego out of it. I don't think you could replace the generation. So while the music changes, so do the evolution of the people. And I know that my generation and younger generations, we care, and in some ways, we're more progressive than your generation, maybe a little more educated, but some of that humanity's kind of slipped away.
I sort of agree with you. Although it's kind of hard to, I don't want to put down to be negative about what's going on today. I do know that individuals have almost disappeared. Right. Nowadays, you have bass players that will be very good trumpet players, or very good guitar players, or piano players, and they just, they play their field because the bass is a big instrument, and it gets a lot of attention, and a lot of people just want attention on the bandstand, whereas when I came up playing, the only attention that we needed was that we were good players and that we could be, used and worked with just as a good player, not on the way that we looked or what kind of strap we had or what kind of bass we played. Well, of course, back in my day when I first started, there was only one bass to play. But, of course, they have many bass manufacturers now. But, we were not individuals. We were individuals as a team. All the people that you mentioned, that day is just about over. Although when we say things are over, there's always things happening off on the side and under the radar that are still the same way because there's still a lot of young musicians that think the way that I'm speaking now. You want to make the band sound good. You want to do your part. Every instrument has a role. The bass has a role to be consistent like a drum and to provide a bottom so that everybody else can create. Now, of course, the individual playing the bass, we'll talk about bass players, but the individual playing the bass has to bring something to the table. And what I bring to the table is many, 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 many hours of practice. Many hours of practice. I'm talking about many. And knowing the instrument. You cannot do anything unless you know the instrument that you're playing. What it will do and what it won't do. Some instruments, although a bass is a bass, they're all different. If I can use the cliche or term of like girlfriends, before we get married, we go through dating different girls, and they're all different, although they're the same. But you have to expect from the instrument what
Right.
the instrument does.
Right.
You know, so that comes up. I spent a lot of time practicing, also to understanding what the role of my instrument is. People have to like you in order to hire you or want to work with you to a certain point. Now, there's some people that are not liked that well, but they are extraordinary musicians, and you just put up with certain personalities and certain characters because you want the best musician as you possibly can. So it all boils down to just playing a whole lot to find out what works and what doesn't work, and where you're strong at and where you're weak at, and you get the experience of of just knowing when to do what and what not to do. I think what not to do is more important than it is to know what to do.
And not to, and thank you for reeling me back in, because again, this is not about, it is not my role or job. I'm not a musician. I don't want to, there are so many talented cats out there, but I look at, like Harold Land. I mean, you were so busy that you didn't necessarily go. I just know that there were guys like Harold Land who would bring Bobby Hutcherson, and they would bring the skipper over. They'd bring people to their house to play, and then they would go to. And it's like I look at you guys as the last big brothers, and even though the dynamics of how music is disseminated it's changed so much, but I look at you guys as the guys that should be mentoring the way you were mentored. And it's painful to me that while yes, I mean, again, we've talked about this, Japan, Europe, it's the music is still flourishing. It is, I know that you guys would be just incredible mentors on the same level that Dizzy and Moody and, the list goes on and on and on, but yet, it moves on, and I'm not trying to carp on that. I wish you guys had opportunities in forums, and not necessarily in specialized schools or universities, just the opportunity to work with younger musicians in live settings, the way you used to do it, with King Curtis going up and down the blues circuits in Missouri and whatnot.
Well, one of the problems is, like the ego is a large part of what we do, and how we handle the ego is very, very important. There are a lot of great musicians, as you mentioned. Even now today, there are a lot of great musicians. And some are thought of well, and some are not thought of as being so well, but the ego has a lot to do with how you present yourself, especially in conversations like this. I've heard a lot of interviews from players that I admire, but when I hear them talk, I hear more ego. Well, I have an ego for sure. We all have an ego, but the ego sometimes, if it's not channeled or controlled, people begin to make more out of themselves than what they really are. Now, I consider myself, just in being in a practical term, I'm just a simple monk that plays the bass. I like to say that because, I've studied music, I practiced a whole lot during my career, still practice a lot, but I'm a simple person in that I play simply, although it doesn't sound that way. But I do have a style to where I know what does not work, and there's too many bass notes. So I try and play a lot of rhythm on the few notes that I do play. And then, of course, younger players or players listening to me think that I'm this incredible bass player that has 14 fingers and I'm doing all this, but that's not the case. I have just studied myself for over the last 50 years. I know what I do well, and I know what I want to present. But when people begin to go into lectures or people go into seminars that have not been schooled or trained on how to talk to younger people, they have a tendency to talk more about themselves and to say things that don't really make sense. What makes sense is for the individual to sit down and practice, just play. One of my favorite people is Bird, and that when he talks very, very honestly about who he is, and he's just a plain guy, he says, and he's just practiced a whole lot all the time. And the things that people think that he created or invented, he didn't really invent it or create it. He was just being what his practice taught him to do, what he can't do. So he was just showing, if you see a person a person in your neighborhood, and he's maybe a block away, and they're running away, but you know who they are. They're running away from you, and you know who they are because of the way they run. Everybody does not run the same way. Everybody does not walk the same way, but we all run and we all walk. We all don't laugh the same way. We all don't wear the same colors. We all don't drive the same car. The cars are different colors and different brands, but we get to where we're going because a car is a car. A run is a run. A walk is a walk. It's all individual. Some people have a nice smile. Some people have a smirky smile. People have to find out who they are and do it well. But when people start talking to groups of people about who they are and what they should do, a lot of times I think it's 50-50 that they go too far, and they think, they sort of get above themselves, if I can use that phrase. They're not honest about what happens and what does not happen. Everybody wants to say the best that they possibly can about themselves, and promote the best out of themselves that they can, especially in interviews and articles.
And the problem is that, a lot of times, if you get to a certain level, there's not really the long format interview anymore, which is why I love doing this stuff, because you get into the soul of the musician themselves. If you got 10, it's my job. One of my jobs. I was thinking about this interview yesterday, and I said, I am just, there's just so much music that we need to get to, Chuck, and I was hoping to play a track here, and I'm not sure when the last time you heard it, but come back and maybe you can walk us through, what you were doing on the track. Is that okay?
Sure it is.
What was Hampton doing that was so kind of revolutionary at that time, in your mind?
Well, in my mind, basically, he was a jazz piano player who wanted to play ethereal music or jazz music over something that was connected with rhythm or that had some kind of a groove to it. I liked him a whole lot. I liked some of the up-tempo stuff that we did a little bit more. But when you hear a musician wanting to do something like what you just played, you sort of like get into what they have explained, what they want to do. They want some kind of rhythm, and two, say he was concerned with selling records, but he wanted to keep his identity and selling, into what he was doing. I did like his music a whole lot, and it's not the time to agree or disagree with what he's thinking, because he was an artist. He was a very good piano player, and it was his session, and it was his idea. So the one thing that we all had to do was to get into his head and try to appease him or try to accommodate him in what he wanted. Because, in making his records or making records that are sellable, I've been wrong about as many times as I've been right. When I say I like something, I don't think it's going to do anything. 50% of the time ends up being a hit, or well-liked. The things that I liked and I thought would sell a whole lot, it would be very good, didn't sell at all. But then that has a lot to do with the record companies. Some things are not marketed correctly. Or I wouldn't say correctly, but they're just not marketing. They're just not marketed, rather. Hamp was that kind of a person. I did like, as I mentioned earlier, I did like the more up-tempo stuff where I had a chance to play a groove, a danceable groove, or at least a groove that, would have you popping your fingers.
When you went into the studio, you'd get the charts. You wouldn't get a lot of information. You just kind of he'd kind of give you a sketch, and then you'd kind of have to just do it on your. I mean, it was totally seemed like it was just kind of on the fly, and that's what made it so kind of organic.
That's what makes it good too, because if you have a chance to really study the music, maybe it comes off a little bit better. But my experience, especially in recording music, if I have heard it before, I have too much of a chance to be very specific on what I think I want to hear, as opposed to doing it on the fly. I'm old school, and basically somebody tells you what the tempo is, and they give you an idea what the song is, or you work at it for about an hour. It's the best approach, because music is abstract to a large degree. And depending upon who's in the rhythm section, we all have to, it's like meeting a group of people for the first time, and you have a conversation on the subject. Say you want to talk about the moon, and you just meet people for the first time, or maybe you're meeting the same people, and you just start talking about the moon. Now, of course, if you have an opportunity to study what you want to say and how you want to say it, it may come off a little bit better. But music-wise, it's like dance or abstract art, or even not abstract art, but art, period. You just do. A painter doesn't have a chance to make a mark on a canvas and then erase it. He has to have something immediately in his mind. Well, he may think about it before he starts doing it, but once you put the line, make a mark on the canvas, you can't erase it if it's paint. Music is the same way. You get together with people, other, sometimes we don't. But the artist or the leader explains what he wants to do and how he wants to do it, and he has hired people that he expects to have a point of view about what he's talking about. And that's what I like. I like the people like him, and that he was abstract, especially in his jazz. And I think he knew that. That's why he wanted to have a solid foundation underneath him, or at least musicians that understood what he was doing, and they would sort of complement what he was doing. And Dougal is a great musician, and I love playing with him. I enjoy knowing him as a person, a personal friend. He's a good friend of mine.
Yes.
We're friends with each other. We work together a lot, and it's just great to be able to sit with somebody, and all of us, within a short period of time, we all agree on what should go under who we're playing for. Spiderweb was the same way.
Yeah, we do not want to rush into this. The one, for my audience's sake, I mean, one thing about Chuck Rainey's bass playing, that I think that it's booty shaking bass playing. People dance. You grew up in a time when music was made for dancing, and that's what your bass lines do. So on this next track, I promise you'll hear your bass on this one. Okay?
Okay. One of my favorite instruments, other than the electric bass, is the tuba. And originally, I was a trumpet player in high school and college. And in college, I switched to baritone horn, which gave me a little closer reach to the bass clef, although I didn't know I was going to be a bass player. But a lot of my playing comes from listening to a lot of tuba, especially in organized progressive music. Those people that do play it, like in New Orleans, tuba player, they have a tuba player, or in Mexican music where they have a tuba playing the bass. And so a lot of that, too, I love marching bands, and especially show bands. I just left Atlanta watching the Battle of the Bands with my son, actually with my son and daughter and 2 grandkids. And I do that every year because I like to hear the tubas, of course, the drum cadences also, too. So when I'm playing, I think that's what put me and Bernard Purdie more or less on the same track, in that I don't know if he was into show band march music or drum cadences, but when I was younger, I also played field tom in a marching band. So on grooves like that, I'm more or less thinking of stepping. I look at the show bands, I'm looking at people just being in a groove and playing, and I guess the tuba has a whole lot to do with how I think about the bass. By the way, what was that you just played?
That was Gary Burton on Atlantic, an album called Good Vibes. That song was called Boston Marathon. And the reason I played it was because when I talked to Bernard, he talked about the ultimate iconic New York rhythm section, which was, himself, Eric Gale, who was just on fire on that. He was playing a guitar solo there, and then underneath that undulating organ was Richard T. And I just say to myself, how really spontaneous and how how invigorating it must have been. I mean, Bernard said that when somebody called him for a gig, you guys were the rhythm section. I mean, that was it. And when a guy like Burton might come in from the West Coast, you guys were doing it, and they would make the album sound completely different. And when I listened to that, Gary let Gale go off, and it was just it was a hip tune. It was a strutting tune, and I just was hoping you could talk a little bit about those guys and what they meant to your career and the music.
Well, for one thing, that particular rhythm session, we played so much together. It's like we were a family. We did do hundreds of recordings together. That's a rhythm session. If it wasn't Richard T., it was Paul Griffin. And we just played so much together. Also, too, we were in a state of mind of being free. People very seldom wrote for us. They would just give a chord chart, and we would sort of just make it up, just to be free. All predicated on what the idea was at that time. We played so much together that we were almost like a family. We were a family. Bernard and I play a lot alike. If I were a drummer, I would probably play just like he plays. And if he were a bass player, he would probably play just like I play.
Mm-hmm.
Richard T. cannot ever be replaced by anybody. He was very, very, very special. People have no idea how special Richard was.
Can you talk a little bit about the qualities in particular? Because all you can get now, if you even have LPs, are pictures and maybe people writing them. But if you could talk about, that kind of family camaraderie about Richard T. would be fantastic.
Well, Richard was very, very special, as I mentioned. There's no one like him. No one would ever be like him. I've been around a lot of keyboard players that do emulate what he did, but they, you would always emulate somebody, but it doesn't quite come off as that person. But Richard T. was what I call an absolute musician. Very good keyboard player, very good bass player too, by the way, on the keyboard. Never minded Richard. Matter of fact, I produced a record in New York once and hired Richard T. on organ. And he played the bass line on organ, and it was just fantastic. Matter of fact, I did that several times with Richard.
Mm-hmm.
He had great ideas. He's a special musician. Had absolute pitch, not perfect pitch, but absolute pitch. And he was an excellent musician. Always had a groove. He had a great arranger too. I worked with Richard many, many times when he was the arranger. He did those things very quickly, and it was always right on. Very, very special person when he came on the scene. Very, very special. I miss him dearly. I really miss him.
Yeah, no, and Cornell has left us as well. I look at you guys. It didn't matter if it was, the Fillmore East, Bill Graham, sort of just, joint clubs where where it was meant for boogie down. I mean, could you talk a little bit about how active you were and how filled up your calendar was in the late?
Well, in my New York years, that's all I did after I left King Curtis band. I was a studio musician, and I played. I did demos. I did everything at all. Part of the success too, as far as being on a lot of records, is somebody will call, and if I'm not working, I would rather play for nothing or for little rather than to sit in my apartment, because I am a player.
Right.
I was really a player then, especially if they said that Richard and Bernard and Eric were on a gig. Now, Eric was my contractor that's how I got in the industry. Eric was a contractor. We met on the Sam Cooke tour. And I don't know who put that band together, but we were on tour with Sam Cooke, and that's when I met him, and he told me to get a telephone number or an answering service, and he would put me on sessions, because he was playing bass and then overdubbing the guitar on the sessions that he contracted. So my days were full. I did not see the sun for 3 years during the day, because we were always working, even on Saturday and Sunday. Of course, you get to where you have enough money to where you can turn down something on the weekend or take the weekend off, which we did. Me and Eric and Richard did do that several times. Just take Friday to Monday off and go to Jamaica or go to Bermuda just to hang. And to be careful now, because that's how we got in the industry, by other people who our predecessors. They were making so much money, or making enough money to where they would just take off for a week. They were not available. And they were the older crew. And so the young crew, me, Eric, and Bernard, although out of the crew, Bernard was probably the first of us to start doing regular studio work. But the schedule was full, 3 sessions a day. And sometimes a gig at night. My whole life was just playing that bass. Just all for about maybe 2 or 3 years before I started taking vacations and started going out for a week with somebody. Or I never really did that, but maybe a weekend. weekend. I know with Roberta, she only worked the weekends. Um, and so I would, maybe I worked Friday through Monday in New York. But while I was in New York, that's what I did. I was a bass player. And that's all I did was play all day, sometimes half the night.
That is an interesting, your predecessors. I'd like to spend a minute on that. Just the idea, I guess, Everett Barksdale, Bob
Jimmy Tyrell.
Right, Bob Bushnell on bass.
Bob Bushnell. Mm-hmm.
And
see, they were older than we were. We were in our early 20s, and they were in their early 30s.
Yeah, put me in a bar in Jamaica with Chuck Rainey in our early 20s. We would have a great time. I mean, that to me is a blast. And then the idea that what did how did those guys handle themselves? What did you learn, if anything, from how those guys carried themselves, or were they already so firmly established that they were, they had checked out, or were they there to encourage you and to keep it happening?
Well, they weren't there to encourage because it's very competitive.
Right, of course.
And of course, two bass players very seldom see each other. Two drummers very seldom see each other. We know that there is. I knew Bob Bushnell and I knew Jimmy Tyrell. I knew all the other bass players that were on the scene, but we never got a chance to see each other unless it was between sessions at Jim and Andy's on 44th Street, I think 48th Street, Broadway. We might run across, each other and say, "Hey, how you doing?" or to meet each other. One thing about them, that generation that was before us, they were all business. They all dressed in suits, and Bernard Purdy still does to this day. I mean, maybe not as much as he did, but they all dressed in suits, and we were all in the union. And they were all business. But one difference in them is we lived in Manhattan, and most of our predecessors lived on the island, where they had to take a train or drive into Manhattan.
Really?
Sometimes when weather is bad or you need somebody right away, rather than call Bob Bushnell or Everett Barksdale, who lived on the island, they would call somebody that was relatively close to the studio. And I lived in Manhattan all my New York career, and so did Bernard. And so did Paul. Richard lived in Brooklyn, but then Brooklyn is closer to Manhattan than the island, that's for sure, because it's just closer. And then Richard did spend a lot of time in Manhattan. So part of the reason, too, for calling younger people is that we were more readily available. And if somebody didn't show up or weather was bad, they could get me in 20 minutes. Because I live right there on Manhattan Island, as opposed to Long Island. So they had a lot to do with it, too. Also, too, we were younger. We had more energy.
Right.
Back in the days when you start thinking about the music, like Jimmy Tyrell, Bob Bushnell, and Everett Barksdale, when they were playing, the bass lines and the guitar parts were very simple. It was more like doom, 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 and drum parts are doom, very simple. When we came in the mid-'60s, we were evolved into playing more of a doom, 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 on the bass, and the drums were playing like Bernard, adding 16th rhythms to the drum part. Also, too, we were hungrier than the guys who had houses on Long Island. We were living in Manhattan, where there are no houses, and we will work for less money sometimes. Also, too, we will work when there was not a lot of money on the table, because we weren't established. And we just wanted to play, and you make more money doing studio work than you would waiting for a gig at night. So I guess to answer your question, the older generation before us, or the people that we've been talking about, the only thing that I see how they helped me or helped us, and they were a straight business. You call them, they would schedule it, and they would be on time, and they look presentable. Nowadays, people show up any kind of way.
It's funny that it's one of those things where I just wasn't around, but you assume that everybody is is I shouldn't say that, but you look at some of the you assume that you're tight with everybody, but the fact is it was hyper competitive. And here these guys, sort of like a football player, we were talking about Deacon Jones and those guys the other day. You see like an old nose tackle or a bass player, drummer. They're not as much energy. They're not as fluid, and then they got younger crop of people coming up, and they're not going to be overly gracious to you. That's pretty obvious. It was a very but you were, I think, it's important. I mean, going back to your, you mentioned it earlier, but you grew up in Youngstown and then moved to Cleveland, but you played a number of instruments prior to the bass. And I was just hoping you could talk a little bit about that and how maybe that made you a little more grounded, gave you a little more confidence as a young musician.
Well, one thing for sure, I've had enough music in my life from a very early childhood. I came up in the Pentecostal church, a family church, listening to a lot of music in church. And then, of course, being a 40s child and listening to R&B. I was in a doo-wop group, the doo-wop singing, I loved that. And then the R&B. With R&B, they didn't have much bass in it. So I played guitar before I played bass. And it's after playing the trumpet and playing classical music and playing marching band music with the trumpet and hearing the drums and hearing the tuba, and then also too loving R&B. Where back in the 50s, there was no bass, just guitar. And so I played guitar after playing the baritone horn, and was in two bands in Youngstown as a guitar player. And then finally, I was in a band where there was only three guitar players and a drummer. And I played single note patterns. And the leader's wife played rhythm, and he was the lead player, and he sang. So finally somebody said, I think it was a drummer, said, why don't you get a bass? And so I got a bass. And that's what started my career as a bass player, because I was already playing single note patterns on the guitar. And so it does give a lot of confidence. I was born in Cleveland, but I was raised up in Youngstown with my father's side of the family. And so moving to Cleveland was very, very easy with the band that was in Youngstown, because they were from Cleveland. And they were in Youngstown a whole lot doing gigs only 60 miles away. And, you got a gig where the gig is. And so they picked me up as a guitar player. And then in that band, I got a bass, because there was no I wasn't that good of a guitar player as it was, because my hands are big and thick. So it worked real good for playing those single note patterns on the electric bass. So I went back to Cleveland with them, and it was easy for me because that's where my mother's family was from. It's a very large family, so it was originally my birthplace, although I was not raised or taught there. All my music started in Youngstown. And then from Cleveland, I got stranded in Montreal and stayed there for about nine months. I thought I was in love. And the band that I went there with, when they left, going back to New York, I just stayed there. And when they came back to Montreal, about 9 months later to do another gig, I was already there, so they didn't have to bring a bass player. And when they left, I left with them and went to New York. So I've never had problems with the music. If it was a top 40 gig, I'd do all the bass lines to all records that were on the air. Definitely, because I listen, as I mentioned earlier, I listen to a lot of music, and still do. So I have never had a problem. And going to New York, I didn't have a problem, because I know from my upbringing in Youngstown that everybody wants to try the new guy. And so when I got to New York, I had a couple of friends that helped me out for a second, because I was not working that much, and did a lot of sitting in. And it's like anything else, new people come around. If they can play, they're going to get a gig. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to try the new guy. And a few people wanted to try me, and they did. And I fared, fairly well.
Well,
I've always liked competition. Not that I thought I was that good, but I hear somebody playing, I say, wow, I can do that, or I would like that. You know, as you know, it is competitive. You got to show up, and the one way to show up is to show up not with the ego, but to show up playing. Can this person play? Can they be on time? Do they get drunk? Do they get high? Can I count on this person to be on the gig? You know, I've always just presented myself just as a bass player, and I can do this. If you like me, I'll be glad to work with you. That kind of thing.
How extensive? I mean, I think it's it's readily apparent to me. I mean, that the drugs played a role in the within the scene, especially going out to California in the early '70s. And I wonder how it affected, if you tried to intervene on behalf of certain friends, if you saw them falling down, because it was a kind of a druggy time period. The music was fantastic. There was the crossover of acoustic to electric instrumentation. You had the Motown gallop crossing over to jazz. All this amazing stuff, but then people were partying pretty hard too, and I'm trying to figure out how you were able to navigate that part of it, because it was definitely an element to the scene.
Well, it's very easy because I'm like Bernard Purdy. We both have the same birth sign. As a matter of fact, I think our birthdays on the same day.
No.
But some people do. The cliche, birds of a feather flock together.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on the bandstand with somebody that you like and they're high or they're using drugs, that's what they brought to the table, and it's best to you help them if you can, but it's best to stay away. I work with some very, very, very rude people with drugs and alcohol. And the thing is, I love them. I love working with them, except I've never been that way. And although I do fit, like Bernard has been as clean as a whistle. That's the first day that I knew him. He's always on time. He's always there. I'm always on time. I'm always there. People like me. And when it comes to that kind of element with drugs, especially drugs, and I'm not coming off as a goody two-shoes person here. But what I am saying is that, number one, it's against the law. Number two, it smells bad, even if it's alcohol. Number one, there are a lot of people who just do not like being around people who are drug addicts, which is very bad because sometimes you're paired with a drug addict, and you got to be careful about your possessions. And so it's just a matter of making a choice. Do I want a room during the days when you're at the room with somebody on the road? Do I want a room with this person? It's either pure yes or no, with an understanding. I'm not a part of this. I don't want to be connected to this because people will look at a group and decide that all these people are the same, which is not the case. There are a lot of people that get involved with people that they don't do what they do, but they get involved with them to where it looks like they are. To me, it does not matter. Some of the best musicians that I played with were using heroin. The music was perfect, but after the music is over, it was just a drag being around them.
Right.
For a lot of reasons, as you can imagine, especially when it comes to smoking, smoking cigarettes or smoking marijuana. It's distasteful when you gotta smell it, and a lot of people just don't do those things, and a lot of producers and arrangers just don't do it, and it's not, my whole thing is when in Rome, do what the Romans do. Now that's good on one side of the coin, but not so good on the other side of the coin. People are one of my most favorite musicians is Great Filling Games. Very, very clean living guy. One of the best piano players I've ever worked with, aside from Richard G. And Richard was involved in everything. Still a great musician. Great Filling Games, involved in nothing, no alcohol, no smoking, just a real nice guy who played his behind off. So it's all a matter of who you are and how you can handle certain things. You make a choice. A lot of people start doing these things because their favorite person or another person does it and they think that's going to help them play. That's not the truth. That's not so much the truth. Doing what somebody else is doing is not going to help you play better. What's going to help you play better is just knowing your instrument and just being a good musician. So it didn't bother me at all working with people that were alcoholics or people that were smokers or people that were on heavy drugs. It didn't bother me at all because when the music was over, I did not have to go home with them and I did not have to hang out with them. You might meet them or see them when you're hanging out between sessions. As I mentioned, like Jim and Andy's, that was the local hanging point in Manhattan. Between sessions, you might see somebody, in Jim and Andy's, hey, how you doing, blah, blah, blah. But basically, if you don't hang, all you got to do is just play the music. And when the music's over, everybody goes their separate ways. That's a decision that the individual has to make. With me, it didn't bother me at all working with someone who was not clean or someone who was red-eyed or someone who was drunk. Because I didn't hire them. Somebody else hired them. And that somebody else had to know whether they were good or whether they were not so good. As I mentioned before, some of the greatest musicians that I worked with were heavy drug users or alcoholics. Didn't bother me at all because they were great musicians.
Right. No, but did you yourself dabble in that stuff? I only ask because I have these records, where I'm looking and there's Chuck Rainey playing a bass line and he's got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. I don't, so I'm like, Carol Kay, the bass player, won't even come and talk to me because of some of the experience she had with people that you're very close with.
And of course I did dibble and dabble over a period of time. And so did she. One thing about Carol Kay that's been very, very disheartening is that when I see, and Carol and I were good friends at one time.
Of course.
But people like Carol are the people who I'm talking about. They will do all of the best that they can to say, because I've been in situations where, I don't know if she ever smoked, but I know she did smoke. I did too at one time. But it depends upon how far you take it. Of course I smoked cigarettes. Everybody else did. Now nobody smokes, including me. There are times and phases when you go in and out of certain phases of smoking, or even I never have been a drinker. I never have, I don't drink at all, never have. And when it comes to things like drugs and cocaine, of course everybody did do cocaine every now and then. Some people went too far with it. And that goes with her also, because I've been in situations with her where we did a line together, or where somebody was smoking. I've never said, stuff like that. So you got to be careful what you believe from certain kind of people. And I'm not I wasn't a goody two shoes all the time, but I was always clean and very careful of when, where, and how, when you did it, or when it was. Also, too, for me, my constitution physically is not strong for that, especially alcohol. I learned that before I left Youngstown.
Right.
I'm not an alcohol drinker at all. Number one, it makes my breath smell bad, and it makes me stupid. So once I left, I guess I was 22. I never, I don't drink at all. But during those days, every now and then, if there was cocaine around, of course I did a little cocaine, like everybody else did, including her. Because personally, with her, when it comes to marijuana, I've never been much of a marijuana smoker at all. Because, again, it smells. People know that you've been doing it. Also, it makes me stupid. So, a long, long time ago, when I was doing it, it was just very little every now and then. I'd just do it just to be a part of the game for a second. But never to where I got stupid, or my eyes were red, or I couldn't think. Some people go too far.
Before we wrap up part one here with Chuck Rainey, I just wanted to play another track of music, something, again, outside of, what people might consider Chuck Rainey on. He did it all. I listened to that in the car with my daughters, and we're always dancing to that one.
Okay, it's really funky. I like that. Who was that?
That was 1972, David Clayton Thomas.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you want to talk about? I mean, if I seriously, Chuck. I mean, there's a picture of you on the inside gatefold. You're holding a puppy, and truthfully, again, I mean, it looks like it was a Spider's on the album. This guy, William Smitty Smith, and David Clayton. But the idea is that Clayton Thomas, this guy, Canadian cat. Playing that roots and soul and R&B, that blues, and what I love about it, I don't know if you were contracted with Columbia or whatever, but it's like he's like, no, I'm bringing in Chuck Rainey and Spider Webb to do the session. That to me was the beauty of that time period, and you guys made that album.
Well, no, we rehearsed that album. Is that Sunrise Tequila?
Tequila Sunrise.
Tequila
That's right.
Sunrise?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, number one, David and I were friends long before that record.
How did you guys meet originally?
We met in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a background singer and an excellent singer. To this day, David and I are friends. And that rhythm section right there, I worked many times with Tessie Calderon, with Spider, and with Smitty. We did a lot of sessions together in L.A. Now, David lived in Mandeville Canyon in L.A. And for that album. He recorded that album. Well, we rehearsed that album many days at his house. And it was always great to go out there because we had to ride through Beverly Hills in order to get there. And he had a nice house. We had a wonderful time. And we spent probably Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for about 2 weeks rehearsing those songs or just being together. As a matter of fact, Tessie and Spider went out on the road with him. I couldn't go because I was too busy. But he was always a pleasure to be around, David Clayton Thomas. He's a pleasure to be around now. A very good singer, a very nice guy. I found him to be wonderful to be around. And, that brings back great memories. That puppy, I forget, the puppy was there, and I'm into dogs, I like dogs, especially babies.
Sure.
And the puppy was so sweet, he just came to me. And so I held him, for a long, long time, every day. I like that puppy. That's great that you mentioned that.
Well, no, it's because I look at you and I'm saying, I find this album like at a used thrift store for like 25 cents, and it's again, whether intentionally or not. I mean, I'm trying to figure out where did you guys actually cut the album? It looks like you're in the Bahamas or something.
No, those pictures were taken in his house.
And that was in California?
Yeah.
All right, because I was going to say, just the idea, and there's other tracks that are, I couldn't, it's so hard, Chuck, to sometimes figure out which ones to play because, it covers the whole gambit. And the thing about Clayton Thomas, I've talked to Amos Garrett, who knew him, and I mean, his father was a brutal father to him. He used to beat him a lot. And then one day he said, David, you're in trouble. Come downstairs. And David beat him to a pulp. And then his dad called the cops on him. Mm-hmm. And, you want to talk about an upbringing, a rugged upbringing that would, I don't know what would go down in today's society like that, but to be able to still come out of that and be, I would love to at some point get a chance to talk to him because I think he's got a pretty compelling story to tell, and he obviously
Well, he does.
Yeah.
See, one thing about David that people don't realize, well, they probably do, but he's a very good vocalist. And in New York, he was fun to be around. His father wouldn't think it because David is not a little guy. Right. Not little at all.
Right.
And he's a sturdy, stocky guy with a great voice, and very, very serious. Everybody that works with him is that I knew at that time was his friend, and so I forget. He probably called me because we're friends, and I had them a lot of sessions. One thing to realize too, Jake, is that a lot of times the people that you see that are continually on a lot of records,
Mm-hmm.
some of that is because of the name value on the record. There was a time, and probably that's the way it is right now, to where when you do a record, if you have name brand people on your record, radio personalities get involved, record companies get involved, whoever is distributing the record. You know, if you have a name value person, a person who has been aired on a lot of other records, it helps sell the record. I know a lot of people that don't even bother to listen to the record once they look and see who's on it. Then they buy it. I was that way for a second when I was buying records. I've never really been a great record buyer. But when I see certain musicians on the record, I'll just get it because those musicians on it. And that happens with me. I've been hired a whole lot because of my name value on the record. I would like to say something other than that, like because I'm a good player, but it's not really true. A lot of us are on so many records because our name is popular, especially to radio personalities. But David, I'm glad you brought him up because I really like the guy. He came through here a couple of years ago with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I don't think he's with that organization. No, he's not. Raw Pepperosy took his part, and I worked along with Raw. But he came through here with his band, and I opened the show. I opened his show here in Dallas with my band, and it was such a pleasure. Such a pleasure.
You know, Chuck, I just want to, before we wrap things up for part one, I want to tell you that, you know, as I sit here and know, you know, the road that I've been traveling for the last couple of years, you know, my new baby, every time I walk her up and down we have these long rolling hills here in Tucson, and there's one song, we didn't play it today, but I just, you know, you don't have, you're a humble cat, but your playing and the personality that you inject into playing has helped me psychologically fend off a lot of demons. And I'm not, listen, if you saw my record collection, it's one of the most eccentric, you know, targeted collections of music. But you have provided me a lot of stability psychologically in my life, and I just can't thank you enough for being as honest and open. And quite frankly, I want to take these sessions to elongate your career and not just obsess about Steely Dan, which seems to be everybody's favorite thing to talk to you about. So I mean, it's you know, you've had a. I think that's the issue in our society now. It's quantitative and qualitative, and we're very much a quantitative society now. How much money do you make? If you make a lot of money, it must mean you're successful. If you don't make a lot of money, it must mean you're not doing something right. As opposed to the quantitative value of actually playing music, for instance, where you can't put a number value on, you know, on helping somebody psychologically, you know. And I think that is one of the most important things that a lot of you guys, not just yourself, but you were one of them. And I wanted to say thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to picking this up with you tomorrow.
Well, man, what a pleasure. It's great talking to you, man. By the way, you know, I used to come to Tucson kind of regularly. I have a cousin in Sierra Vista. Oh,
great. Well, please. Yeah, go ahead.
And I used to go from Sierra Vista up to Tucson. Actually, I did it as a one-man show at the Westwood Look Review. The Westwood Look. I think there's a club there in Tucson called the Westwood Look.
Absolutely. I live about 5 minutes away. Yeah.
Well, I did that for about over the course of maybe a year. I probably did that about 10 times as a one-man show, where I told stories and played my bass, strummed it like a guitar, bass, and, you know, strumming bass notes and rhythm, and telling stories, country and western stories. I did that about 8 times over the course of maybe 2 years there in Tucson.
Well, Yeah, maybe there's some future collaboration. Dallas is not that far. Dallas and Tucson are not that far apart, and there's I met some cat. I met one cat in particular. Guy used to play with Sam Taylor, Lamont Arthur, when Sam was here, and he's a B3 player from your generation. And I promoted a concert for him. He's down in Sierra Vista. Who knows? Who knows what'll happen in the future, Chuck? But I'm going to clean this up, and we'll be in touch tomorrow because we still have to get into the West Coast scene and the studio scene and a little bit more about you're working with King Curtis, and I do want to touch a little bit about Steely Dan, although I am actually kind of bummed out to when I read what you've talked about with them. I've lost a little bit of respect for those guys, only because I don't understand why they wouldn't be a little bit more open about and sharing about who did the real work on those albums. But we'll pick that up, and I hope you have a beautiful day, and everything's bigger in Texas, and so is Chuck Rainey's heart. So you keep it going, man.
And thank you so very, very much. You've been very, very kind. Thank you so much.
All right, talk to you later. Folks, welcome back to part 2 with the Rock of Gibraltar on bass, Chuck Rainey. Chuck, it's great to have you back.
Jake, it's my pleasure to be back with you, my man.
I wanted to talk a little bit about one thing that I missed from last time was the idea of some of these guys that you would consistently run into. In fact, you guys became known as the Funky Thumbs. Specifically Arthur Adams, and a drummer that you worked with quite a bit was Paul Humphrey. And I think he's past us now, but this is about resurrecting the spirits of those who made the music. And I just wanted to know a little bit about your relationship with Paul and what he meant to so many records.
Well, Paul was a good friend, and we did do a lot of sessions together, mostly films. I don't recall really working with Paul that much on records, but of course every now and then he was one of the mainstay drummers that I worked with. But usually on films, I'm associated with Paul, bass and drums. A nice guy from Detroit, and did a couple of live gigs with him too. I can't recall exactly where they were, but Paul was one of the older guys, not that much older, out of Detroit, and he's just very, very different. All his clothes were tailor-made, especially back in that day. When they had the high heel shoes, and the guys were wearing shoulder bags and stuff like that. Well, all his stuff was tailored. Well, I'm glad you brought him up because he was a very interesting guy. Lived very well in Beverly Hills. I think it was Beverly Hills. I remember going to his house a few times. I do remember Paul, very good reader, very good reader. He was one of the first guys that I saw that had his own earphones. In the rhythm section.
Sure.
One of the first guys that I saw do that.
I was going to say, because it's funny you said that. I have a number of albums with you and him on it, not soundtracks. One that we're going to listen to in a little while. Really, I mean, when I hear you guys play off each other, it is literally like, you're keeping that pocket, and he is just keeping the beat, and it's similar to, some of these other great, rhythm sections like, maybe Mickey Roker and Bob Cranshaw kind of thing on the East Coast. But when I hear it, I mean, that's the kind of stuff. There's so much personality within the, and I think that's why you were able to perform on so many different records with so many different people, is that, your ability to fit in, fitting in is fine, but fitting in can also mean not really saying what you feel. And you had the ability to not just fit in, but also you have your own language, and that is a gift. I mean, is that something that you can really? I know we said that before. You said it 3 times. You practice, 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 practice. But can you? What are those intrinsic things that in your mind that you had that that allowed you to be able to be so almost like a chameleon in some ways, just to be able to fit in everywhere, yet still be able to put your imprint on it?
Well, it's kind of hard to say, Jay. It's really kind of hard to elaborate because it's so personal that I just don't know how to say it. Other than, as I mentioned earlier, that everybody smiles, but everybody has their own style. And working with good drummers, Paul was a good timekeeper, and he's a very specific, straight drummer. And when I'm working with a drummer who's very profound and just keeping a good, steady flow and rhythm, then it does allow me to add adjectives and adverbs, if I can say it that way, to the conversation that I'm having with him, this director there, whatever the artist or producer wants. It's very easy just to be yourself. So I don't know how to explain how I know I play the same thing on all records. I'm very, there's only, I don't try and do things that I'm not accustomed to doing because I've played so much. I just basically have found a way to just to speak from the bass, rhythmically, to where it just fortifies whatever it is, the project is. I guess we all bass players have their own individual conversation that they have. But with Paul, he was very, very professional, number one, always on time. He read very, very well. And working with people like that, I read well, or I do read well. But at the same time, a lot of people do not write bass parts or drum parts.
Right.
They just give you a chord sheet and have you stabilize whatever it is that they need for the artist or for the production. So it's kind of hard to say what, other than I practiced so much. There was a time where I would put in 6-7 hours a day, especially when I got to New York, and just practicing or playing along with the records. But then that alone doesn't do it. I spent a lot of time with other acts and artists traveling on the road and just playing live local gigs in New York, to where you get to a point to where you learn what not to do as opposed to what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And what not to do is to speak out too loudly. It's like 4 or 5 people having a conversation on a particular subject matter. And in most groups of people that are talking, there's always one person who's out speaking everybody else, or speaking louder, or the one who's saying the most. Sometimes that's a planned thing, but they can't ignore it. The other 4 people, when no one else has anything to say. But in music, it's organized to where also, too, you might have a guitar player or a drummer, a bass player or piano player that's speaking louder than everybody else, or just pushing a point. So I hope you follow what I'm saying. It's like some people just talk louder and talk more than they should. Whereas in a lot of the music that is successful, especially to someone like you, who your ears are listening to the project in a certain way, you can sort of tell who is. And sometimes it's the individual that's talking to loud is annoying. But you can't help it. The 4 or 5 guys go to a ball game, and there's one guy that's the loudest, always talking, always has something to say.
I don't do well with those. I'd rather go with people where you can facilitate and all talk together. I don't like those people that are just and you must find that, especially with the ego, some of these guys, they come in and they're just flapping their gums and there's not a lot of work being done. And it's the mental focus part of it when you're in those situations where you're rolling your eyes and you're saying, well, okay, I'm getting good pay, that's great, but I really am at the core, I love the music, and this isn't doing it for me. I think it was from my perspective, and it was the way it was marketed. I mean, I have to keep that in mind. You were the way the photos were taken, the way the liner notes were written, and then the personnel, and the way you guys were wearing your heart on your sleeve. I think about Charles Kennard. I mean, Charles Kennard he worked with mentally retarded children by day, and then at night. For Bob Shad on Mainstream, he was able to cut an album and bring in all these guys, and it like yourself, and it didn't seem like there was those types of sessions. Seemed like everybody had something to say, but there must, I mean, being that you've done thousands of albums, there just must have been times where I just don't know how you filter out some of that mental energy, because sometimes I just kind of lose it on people. That's my personal thing,
Yeah, what happens that way, and it happens that way in the rhythm section also. Sometimes you just got to do. It is what it is. Contracting, they put people together that don't really work well together. But as long as everybody is concentrated on what the groove is, what the song is, everybody does what they can do musically. Then there are a few people who want attention by asking too many questions, or asking questions just to get attention, or trying to input something in their part that will sort of kind of let them and everybody else know that it's them. You have sessions like that, but the main part about all of this is learning how to work with people that you don't particularly feel comfortable with, or working with people that you don't particularly care for whatever the reason may be. The reverse side of that is working with people who don't know you, or would have preferred to have had somebody else. There are a lot of people that work together. I always cite when I first met Steve Gadd, was at Atlantic Records, and I forget who the artist was, but that particular rhythm section had been consistently B. Cornell, Richard T., and Bernard Purdy. And then one day, Bernard wasn't there. And it was just, he just wasn't there. And there was another guy sitting over in the corner, and he was never introduced to the band. And he never introduced himself, which is cool. I do understand that. And we thought it was very, very strange that Bernard wasn't there, because he was basically always there. And nobody spoke to him. He didn't speak to us. Then we sat down to play the chart and to hear the feel. I really forget who the artist was, but it turned out to be such a pleasant experience. And then after the first hour or so working with this guy, we found out that, that he was Steve Gadd. Very quiet, very unassuming, but one wonderful person to play with. Some people that are with him, there are other people that you go in the studio with him and do, and they begin to talk about who they are, what they did, and they're too much in your face. But you have to you have to deal with it. Just like I would like to know at least the name of the person that I'm working with, but if I don't know his name and he's not introduced, so then I still have to go ahead and play the bass. It's just expect that he's going to be what the contractor wanted or the artist wanted. These things are very, very, sometimes they're hard to talk about, and sometimes they're easy to talk about. But once you get a group of people together, if they know each other, 9 out of 10 times it's going to be a lot better than working with a group of people that you have not met before or have not played with before. It's all about personalities. That's the contractor's job, to make sure that the people that he contracted for the job are going to be able to get along musically and mentally, and to work for the artist. That's what makes people like Gary Katz such a great producer, because he puts together people who he knows will get along together, even if they disagree.
I continue, please.
I think I'm just not finished.
I was.
So you get the idea what I'm trying to say.
we don't getting all because this is very esoteric and it has a lot to do with interpersonal stuff. But on a musical point of view, when I talked to I did an interview with Joe Sample, and he talked about really with Motown, hitting its stride in the late '60s. And I think you probably did quite a few sessions for Motown. I know Bernard was out there. Can you talk in musical terms, if you can, because you were kind of one of the forefront guys? But how did that the gallop of Motown, that soul, how did it fuse with jazz? How did it change jazz in your mind?
Well, I never really looked at Motown music as jazz. I looked at it as pop music. Although it's classified as R&B, most of the artists were black. But I looked at it as pop music. Motown for me was very, very difficult. And that, personally, I was always working for people, not always, no, I think that a lot of times I go to Motown, and I'm working with people who have been designated to be an arranger or a producer, but they were not good at it, especially compared to the other sessions and jobs that I was involved in. Motown seemed to be a little bit under the wire for me, and if they played songs too many times, the leader was usually the person who mainly just wrote the song. Mm-hmm. And he's standing there as an arranger shaking his hands with the rhythm. The rhythm section has a click track in the ear, but this guy's standing in front of the band directing and sweating from directing, and not really knowing what he's doing. Mm-hmm. Which is very difficult. Plus, in Motown, me also too, I had a lot of problems with Motown, and you get booked from 10 to 1, and they always overdid the music, and if I had a 2 to 5 and it went overtime, I would have to leave. But the contractor would insist that you stay, and he would call, find out where you're working, and offer to call and say you'd be late. Whereas me, I was from New York, and if I promise you I'm going to be at your session at 2 o'clock, I'm going to be there. If Motown just hired me, I could go a half hour over from 10 to 1 to 1:30, they give me a half hour to get to the next gig. But I felt that if going to Motown got to be more of a, to be honest with you, overall I did not like to go.
Right.
There's a few producers like Willie Hutch was my favorite Motown producer. Very easy to get along with, he knew what he was doing. I like working for Smokey Robinson, but most of the stuff that I did with Smokey I did at his house, not at the studio. There were a few other producers that I liked working for, but basically going to Motown, it's like they were used to working with people that had nothing else to do. Nobody else was hiring these musicians. They were just working on a song. So it's kind of hard for me to talk about Motown because I was not a Motown fan at all.
No, absolutely.
And I was there a lot.
No, and this is why I love talking to Chuck Rainey, because you're getting an inside perspective from somebody who's, I find it a lot with bass players, and you articulate it and you tell stories, but in your mind, in many ways, absolutely, it's a job. It's a professional thing, and it really does help when you can, have somebody who's organizing it that understands, well, we can put these pieces together and, they may not know each other, but I know that they'll vibe together really well. That is a great arranger's sort of skill. And just for the audience here, I got a 1975 for Chuck Rainey. We're going back probably over 35 years. And listen to, you want to talk about filling up the calendar. I remember talking to Ed Green, the drummer, and he's like, you always wanted to keep your calendar filled up, and that was the key. And I'm just going to read off here, Fancy Dancer, Bobby Humphrey, Gears, Johnny Hammond Smith, Jamaica, Say You Will, Joe Cocker, Katie Lied, Steely Dan, Mellow Madness, Quincy Jones, Nucleus, Sonny Rollins, Places and Spaces, Donald Byrd, not a guy I'm not familiar with, Sammy Jones. Then another Bobby Humphrey album, from '75, called Satin Doll. Sergio Mendes, Song from My Lady, John Lucien, Jimmy Witherspoon, Donald Byrd, Larry Coryell. It goes on and on and on and on. At that point, how did you divide your time between your responsibilities as a father and a husband, and then, was it all centrally located? Because it seems to me like every day in that period in your career, you must have been getting calls.
Well, it was a job. A lot of people go to work from 9 to 5, and basically at that time, especially when I moved to Hollywood, you do want to keep the calendar filled because you have to live. You got to support your family. In New York, I didn't have a family. I was single. That was very easy. When I moved to California, of course, with a wife, 2-car garage, and a baby.
Yes.
You got to go to work. So basically, it's I had no problem. I would answer my answering service, accept the date if I was not working at a particular time, and just go to the session and just play my bass. Now, we must remember too that a lot of these people did not know me from Adam at the very beginning. And you have a contractor or a producer who reads liner notes or hears about, in the environment who's doing what and how things are. Like Quincy didn't know who I was. His contractor did in New York and in L.A. All the same way with Walter and Donald. Steely Dan. They had no idea who Ian Bernard or Paul Humphrey or Harvey Mason were. They just wanted somebody who had a name value. And when you put their name on the record, and this is when they were giving the side musicians credit. People do buy records by looking at who's on the record. So I wouldn't say half of them, but at least 30% or 25% of the time, I'm hired because of my reputation. My name value on the record to help sell the album if my name was on it. But other than that, when you get to the studio, someone else has put the band together, and you're there for a job. Mm-hmm. You're there to do the best you can to appease and to please the arts and the producer. And of course, the producer is working for the artist. Sometimes it's vice versa. Sometimes the artist is working for the producer. But you still got to please the person that hired you. So that you can come back tomorrow or another day. And of course, people like to work with people that they can get along with. I've always tried to have a pleasing personality, not to talk too much, but to be able to do something. If I'm doing something that I want to do and they don't like it, and I disagree, I'm not one to say I disagree. If I'm playing a particular way and a person is suggesting to do another thing that I disagree with, I just do what they want to do.
I love it. No, it's so beautiful, man, because you're talking about values that are non-existent on a lot of levels now in our society. Whether it's in a bureaucracy, whether it's in music, whether it's in politics, whether it's in entertainment, sports, it doesn't matter. The idea of disagreement is paralysis now. It's really a paralyzing force for a lot of things, and it's one reason we're sort of mired in this and can't seem to get any traction in my mind as we move into this new century. Whereas you're saying, you might have serious, strong disagreements, and it's like, I'm just going to let it go. And I just think that is one of the most powerful things, especially, because there's so many people that have that, they don't have that filter. And I think that's one of the things that I'm still working on in my life. I mean, in general, if maybe it's just insecurity, but it's like, I feel the need to have to, not all the time, but, interject, get my thoughts across, and because it's important. And you're basically coming at it saying, well, I know that I would maybe go in a different direction, but, I know my role, and I'm just going to stay quiet and or just cooperation, you know.
Very
And
good to cooperate. Now, I haven't always been good at that, Jay. I had to learn how to do that. Because sometimes I was correcting my thinking, and sometimes I was wrong. But then sometimes I didn't have all the information. I remember doing a record date in New York for Gary Cash. And the band was from London. And one thing about having privacy when you're doing a record is because you don't, as good as you don't have to be involved with a lot of strange people that have nothing to do with the project. Excuse me. You know, they have nothing to do with the project, but they're in the control room and they're in the studio. But in this particular session, it was basically a funk section or a Memphis kind of thing. And the first 2 days, there was a guy in the control room, many of them, 2 or 3, and he kept messing around with little simple things that I was doing on the bass, which I thought was ridiculous because it was straight R&B, and what I was doing was definitely what was needed. So on the 3rd day, and it was just one guy out of maybe 3 or 4 that did not seem to have anything to do with the project. And I think I may have known that this guy was a singer. Because you know what happens sometimes when a studio or when a record company hires a band, they're hiring the lead singer because they saw him with his band. But once they do the record, they use the studio band.
Of course, yes.
As opposed to using his band.
Right.
And so on the 3rd day, I called up Jerry before the session, and I voiced my opinion about this guy being very nitpicky about R&B stuff. And I was beginning to, have a problem with it. And so, but not enough of a problem where I was going to voice my opinion and cause a stir. And he said, well, he's the bass player in the band. And he's also the lead singer. So what he's probably doing is he's probably knowing what it's hard to sing and play the bass sometimes. Or not hard, but you got to, like, as a singer and a bass player myself, I have to choose material that can fit over me being a bass player, if you follow what I'm saying. It's not like a guitar player just strumming, but a bass player has to be like a drummer. You got to keep something consistent going. So to me, it would have been really nice if he had told me that, that this is the lead singer, he's also the bass player. And I would have understood why he was nitpicking little things that was making me uncomfortable for the first 2 days. But being uncomfortable should be no problem for anybody. You just got to and plus, I was able to talk to Gary this way because we were friends, and I had worked with him so many times. So I could say, hey, man, what's this guy? He's bugging me. And so if I had that information the first day, it wouldn't have bugged me. I would have understood that he wants me to play something that he can play and sing over.
Would that have would you have been comfortable with that, or would that have been like you would have been like, okay, was he literally like? I'm just trying to get the idea when you were doing you were playing the songs. He was actually in the control room, like tweaking your bass as you were playing it, or after the fact.
No, just mouthing out. Don't do this. There's the difference between boom, ba-dum, 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 he didn't want me to go to the deep boom. He didn't want me to go boom, ding-dong, dong, ding-dong, ding-dong. Instead of I was playing ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. It gets to be a pain in the butt.
No, I can imagine. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
But now, professionally, I have to make a living. And I have to please the person. Now, there's a producer sitting there. He ain't saying nothing. He's letting this guy do this to me. But then the producer hired me because he knew that I would handle the situation that one particular way. I do what the guy wanted. I say, well, like this is half of a bass line. It would sound better if it were like this. If I'm asked, if somebody asks my opinion about what I'm playing or about what they asked me to play, I can give my opinion. Just like Donald Fagen not wanting me to slap the bass. He never asked me at all about what I thought about a bass line. All he had been listening to was Louis Johnson slap the bass. And of course, the way Louis did it, the sound of the bass it was not like your average bass because it was used a lot of treble. So I can't help what Donald was listening to. But I do know as a player, if I slap a particular part, it's going to give, from my interpretation of music, it's going to give it a better flavor. You know, and so like you just gotta hide certain kind of things because some people are not aware of what's going to sound good. They already come preconditioned into a session on what they think they want.